So today I wanted to make a video on potting mix versus soil for a while, but it was a video that I didn't know if anyone else other than me found interesting. And then somebody just recently left a comment on a YouTube video that said, hey, do you use potting soil or garden soil when filling your raised beds? And I was like, this is a sign that I should actually talk about this. So I didn't have any experience with container gardening when I really started getting into it about 5 years ago now. And I'd grown up watching my grandfather garden in the yard. Everybody that I knew who had a garden had a yard to garden in. And that's what kind of took me so long living in Chicago to just go for it anyway. So I started watching videos on gardening in pots, gardening in containers. And one of the first things I feel like was always said in the video is don't just go out to your yard and fill your pots with the soil in your yard, because that does not work very well for pots. And I will get into why in just a little bit. But from the very beginning of me getting into container gardening, that was the piece of information that I heard over and over again. And then in my horticulture classes, I'm working towards my certification. I am almost 3/4 of the way done. We did have one of the classes that focused on like the components of soil versus dirt versus potting mix, everything that goes into potting mix, and I find it so fascinating. In fact, my teacher right now for this semester, I believe his PhD is in soil. And I feel like I could be so entertained getting a whole PhD in soil and learning almost everything there is to know about it, but I don't have a PhD in soil, so I'm just gonna go over kind of the things that I've picked up either on my own from reading articles or through the classes that I have taken, and talk a little bit about potting mix, soil, and then is there a difference between potting soil and potting mix? So first, let's talk about what is soil. And there are a lot of different definitions depending on your source. So I decided to go with the Soil Society of America, and they say that soil has four main components: minerals, organic matter from decomposing plants and animals, water, and air. And what was interesting to me in my horticulture classes and then reading through this definition is that there is a difference between dirt and soil. So going back to the Soil Society of America, they say the dirt in soil is part of the mineral component. So dirt is a component of soil. Soil just has a lot more to it. It says that soil has dirt in it but contains additional components that are teeming with life, and that makes it possible for plants to thrive. Soil provides the structural support for plants used in agriculture. It is also their source of water and nutrients. So that was interesting to me. I think there's a lot of terms I know that I use in gardening just because I didn't know there was a difference and just kind of use interchangeably with one another. And I know that there's other instances like that, like raised beds versus elevated beds, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But there's so many terms that I think people are used to substituting for each other. Like even when I'm talking about filling a container right now, like let's say I'm filling a pot, I'll say like, oh, let me fill this pot with soil. But really I want to get better at saying, let's fill this with potting mix or potting soil, just to make sure I'm using the most accurate terms. I mean, I'm not going to be too hard on myself, but I do like knowing that there is a difference between like just saying this is dirt and this is soil. So now let's talk about what potting mix is, and then we'll get into the differences and why you should use potting mix instead of soil for your containers. So potting mix doesn't contain any soil. And I don't know if this is something, again, commonly known or that people don't really know until they get into gardening, but I was actually taking a whole different class. It was a home horticulture class through, I think it was the University of Oregon or Oregon University. And there was, I think, a test to see the different particles, and you were supposed to mix the soil in your yard with water, and I don't have that, so I used potting mix. And I think that was my first realization, because everything floated to the top, which it wasn't supposed to do if it was normal soil. But that's when I first realized that, oh, there is no soil in potting mix. So different potting mixes will have different ingredients. It's not like there's one set recipe for what makes potting soil, but usually there's some type of nutrients in it or fertilizer for the plants. There's usually some sort of organic matter. There's something that is in it to help aid drainage, like perlite or vermiculite. And there are so many different potting mixes. I mean, you can get some specifically for like cacti, specifically for plants that maybe need a little bit more moisture. So the ingredients are going to be different based on not only the brand you are getting, but that brand can have a lot of different varieties that are tailored specifically to a certain type of plant. It's also sterile, or it should be. I found some weird things in bags of potting mix, so is it really as sterile as it should be? I don't know, but whatever you're getting in a bag of potting mix, potting soil, this should be sterile, whereas anything that's out in your yard is definitely not. So why don't you want to use soil in your container garden? Now I know it is very tempting because the soil, if you have a yard, is out there and it's free and you can just go fill up your pot. But soil is much more compact than a potting mix would be. Again, this is made to be light and fluffy and have great drainage. Now, when you have soil in the ground, there are worms and other creatures that are in there helping to aerate the soil. And when it's in a pot, it just becomes very compacted very quickly. And an issue I already have using fluffy, well-draining potting mix is my roots get suffocated because of the moisture that we get, all of the rain, all of the snow, keeps the soil wet. It cuts off the oxygen to the roots, and the roots start to rot. And my plants die. That's been the main killer of plants in my garden is root rot. So that is the main reason that you don't just want to go out to your yard and fill your pot with soil, because it is so compact, whereas this is specifically made for plants in containers. Now you can use soil as a base for a potting mix that you make. And actually, let me pull up the recipe because I've never done this because, again, I don't have easy access to soil. So it would never be something that I'd have the opportunity to do. But I have seen people say that this should be cheaper. Now, you will still have to buy the amendments that you're adding to it. So whether that's compost or perlite, whatever it might be. But in terms of cost, like per unit, let's say, it typically should be cheaper if you make your own. So you can do that if you want to, but for me, again, it's not even an option that I have. And I will say, potting soil is one of the most expensive parts of my garden. Now, as time goes on, I do reuse my potting soil, so I feel like I don't have to buy more every year, except I do keep adding beds and pots to my garden, so maybe that's not quite true, but I haven't hit it yet where I don't have to buy any bags of potting soil. So here's the recipe I found. It says, place equal parts of soil, peat moss, perlite, and compost in a bucket. Add in half a cup of garden lime and a handful of bone meal, and then use a hand shovel to thoroughly mix all the ingredients until they are incorporated. Then you sift the mixture with a 1/2 inch mesh to remove any large pieces of debris. Now, this is where I've also seen conflicting information. Some people say you should sterilize the soil because, again, you're getting it from the ground, so it's not sterile. And do that by baking the soil at 200 degrees in your oven. Now, I'm also a person that likes as few steps as possible. So even if I had access to ground soil, I don't think I would go through the whole process of having to sterilize it. But then on the flip side, I have seen people say not to sterilize your mixture by heating it because you're also killing beneficial bacteria. So I don't know what the best method is. Again, I've never tried it. I just go for the bags of the potting mix, but it is something that you can make on your own. And I've seen people on YouTube making their own potting mixes. So if you do have a yard and ground and soil available to you, know that that is an option. Now, another point to hopefully not make this overly complicated, because that's not my goal, but then sometimes I like to go a little bit deeper and I feel like it just adds unnecessary information. But I do think it's important just to be aware of is that I have seen instances where people will say there is a difference between potting mix and potting soil, but also a lot of the time they are used interchangeably when you are looking at a garden center and there are bags that say potting mix, potting soil, and they're the same thing. So I found this graphic from Spruce that I'll put up on the screen here, but it basically says that potting soil is for non-container gardening and landscape use. So for example, a raised bed that you have that the bottom doesn't exist. So the bottom is the ground. Whereas I have elevated beds, so there is a bottom on them. So I would stick with potting mix instead of using a potting soil if it's not made for container purposes. Also, it's typically based from in-ground soil. It's non-sterile and contains minerals and organic matter. So there are products sold in stores that are made from soil. And I will go to a specific one in a second because I did want to do a comparison. But from my personal experience, anything I've ever seen labeled potting soil like this bag is made to be used for containers and does not actually contain any soil. So potting mix, on the other hand, they say the difference is this is made for container gardening, outdoor and indoor plants, seed starting, it's soilless, it's sterile, and it contains components that improve aeration and drainage and might contain fertilizer. So I bring this up, again, not to make this more confusing, but just to get it out there that you want to make sure you're getting from the garden center what you mean to be purchasing. So most of the time on the bag, it'll say for containers or for in-ground use. It'll specify that. What I've traditionally seen is anything that's actually made with soil and is not for containers is usually called garden soil, topsoil. I don't think I've ever come across something that says potting soil that isn't made to be used for containers. And I feel like if the word potting is in it, it should be specifically made for pots. But just read the label of what you're getting and make sure you're getting the correct thing. So now let's do what I think is the fun part and investigate the different types. I only have one bag right now of the potting soil because I've gone through the ones already, but I did pull some up, and if I can find a photo of the ingredients list, I'll post it in here too, but I picked 3. So for example, Miracle-Gro Potting Mix. So this is called Potting Mix on the bag, is a blend of sphagnum peat moss, composted bark fines, and natural fertilizer. So again, it's a soilless potting mixture. Now I also found something at Home Depot called Timberline Topsoil, and this on the bag, it says is a topsoil is an organic soil designed for top dressing lawns and gardens. A ready-to-use soil, also good for blending with peat and compost to create custom potting blends and planting medium. So that one specifically has the word soil in it to let you know that it's made from soil, and then says that you can use this to create your own potting mix, but you don't want to just use it on its own. So I thought that was a good kind of comparison between something called potting mix and something called topsoil, and those are both, again, things you'll be able to find easily at garden centers or big box stores like Home Depot. So now let's look at the one bag that I actually have on hand, which is the Bacto, and I believe this is called the Light Premium Potting Soil. So this says potting soil, not potting mix. So let's look at the description now, because I think this is interesting and not as straightforward as I think it should be. But it does say an all-purpose lightweight soil, so it does have the word soil in it, for indoor and outdoor planting in containers and beds. So as long as I'm reading that it works for containers, I'm good to go. As well as starting seeds in root cuttings. It says that it contains a blend of sphagnum peat and other materials, including starter and slow release fertilizers to help plants thrive. So at least according to what it says it contains, it doesn't say it contains soil, but again, they call it potting soil. It says it's an all-purpose lightweight soil for indoor and outdoor planting in containers. So for me, I think this is just one of those instances where potting soil doesn't necessarily mean there's soil in it, and I don't, again, want to make this overly complicated. So I would just look and see if it says it's used for containers or not. All right, well, I hope that was helpful or maybe even interesting to start understanding the differences between soil, potting mix, potting soil that doesn't actually contain soil, and just understanding a little bit of difference between what those words mean. Again, I am so used to saying like, oh, filling my beds with soil, but I'm actually not filling them with soil. And I don't want to make someone think that it is just soil from a yard or anything like that. So I am going to try to be better about saying potting soil or potting mix. And I almost forgot, I have this sitting here, unrelated to anything we've been talking about, but I saw this and I had to have it. Now I need to figure out though, what to plant in it. And also I don't have any experience with these moss planters, but I feel like I've seen people leave them outside in their gardens. But will this get ruined if it gets rained on? Let me know if you have any type of moss planters that you use and if they're for indoor only or outdoor as well. I mean, it'd be cute even in here, but I would like to get it out in the garden. So let me know and also let me know what I should plant in here. That is going to be everything for this video. Let me know if you have any questions down below, and I will do my best to answer them. Again, I'm not a soil expert like my professor is, but I have learned a lot from my horticulture classes so far. I have one class left. I don't know if I'll be able to take it fall semester or spring semester, and then I will have my horticulture certification. So yeah, that's everything. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.